On this week's Carrier App, we speak with Elligence to discuss its recent network latency performance testing that showed T-Mobile and Verizon outpacing rivals AT&T and Sprint, and why those results are important for consumers and the app community. All right, well, thanks for joining us on this week's Carrier App. I'm your host, Dan Meyer, Editor-in-Chief here at RCR Wireless News. And joining me this week is Andrew Levy, who's the co-founder and Chief Strategy Officer at Elligence, talking a bit about the company and some of the a recent report the company put out. So, hey, Andrew, thanks for joining us this week. We appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Very good.
Well, the data.
Cool, yeah, definitely. Well, let me start off with just a little overview of Elligence for those who maybe don't know much about the company there.
So we've been around a little over 5 years. We focus on mobile user experience. Essentially what that means is I'm sure you've all used the mobile app that didn't work that well, right? It was slow, it was laggy, it was crashing. So what we do is we not only track the customer journey through the app, but we track where you actually struggle, where you run into problems while you're using the app, while you're trying to log in or buy something. Maybe it's check into your room. We collect a ton of data that helps companies, app publishers, large brands, really drive that 5-star app experience that they're looking for. And we do this at a very large scale. We're in at least 500 million devices globally. And it's across 3 of the top 5 U.S. retailers, 2 of the top 3 hotel chains in the world, very large banks, some of the largest credit card processors in the world. And having that footprint allows us to do a few things. It allows us to help our customers understand trends in mobile that are impacting their strategy and their applications. For example, if you want to launch an app in a certain region, what does that mean? What do you need to be aware of? What service provider should you be looking at? It allows us to paint a picture of context for that. What that means is, what was the user's environment? What was happening that may have caused this poor user experience in the app? Did they go through a tunnel? Were they on a legacy device? Those types of questions. The other thing that our data allows us to do is really analyze the major players in the mobile industry. Specifically, we're talking about the carriers today. Having a global footprint, we have data from over something like 175 countries. We see all the major carriers, and we're able to track how their network is impacting the app and ultimately those end users that are using them.
Oh, okay, makes sense. So I guess how does your platform get embedded then into the device? Is it something that the application puts in there, or how does it get? How do you get inside the device for the consumer?
So we work directly with the app publishers. Okay. So we are embedded into the apps. The way it works is we have an SDK. You embed into an app. It takes about 5 minutes to get up and running. Very easy to get started. And we do have a bunch of optional bells and whistles. If you wanted to configure, say, what flows you wanted to manage, we try to automate as much of that as possible for our customers. For example, we're able to automatically track things like application launch times, all the network activity, so all the cloud service communication, metrics like latency and request volume, data sent and received. We automate any crashes, detection of crashes and the collection of diagnostic data around that, as well as some geo-performance type data. We do all this with security and privacy in mind. It's all non-personally identifiable information, essentially data about aggregate usage in the app and aggregate diagnostic data.
Got it. So it seems like a pretty comprehensive platform that really can get a lot of information. I mean, basically almost as much as any app provider, I'm guessing, would probably even need, really.
Yeah, it's, if you think about all the issues that a user could run into while they're using an app, it's a very long list. And what you really want to prioritize by is on the impact to that user. So for example, you might collect data on some analytics provider collecting data in an app, but if that analytics provider fails, it may not actually impacts the user, right? It hacks the background. Maybe the publisher doesn't get some data, but what you'd really want to focus on is what are the issues directly impacting the user? That's causing frustration. That's causing churn. Your retention numbers to drop. That's causing, in the case of a telco, maybe they go to change to a different carrier, or they return that device that they're using. And you can imagine working your way down the list where things like crashes and failure for things to load kind of at the top of that hierarchy of abandonment, if you want to call it that. And then you work your way down to sluggish UIs to it drains the battery. Things that will cause you to either lose a user or get a bad review in the app store or lose revenue, et cetera.
Got it. Okay. And then do you guys, I guess, provide a readout then to the app provider about all the stuff, or do you kind of give them the tools and they can kind of pull out what they need? I guess how's that model for you guys work?
So we collect all this data. It's a cloud service that you can log into, and we help companies use their data to triage so they can understand, what are my most critical issues impacting the app. That could be triaged by number of users affected or by the business impact. And then we give them enough data so that they can go back and recreate those problems. So, what buttons was the user tapping on? What screens were they on that led to that issue, along with all of the diagnostic data and data about the hardware and software configuration that you would need to recreate that issue in-house. So we provide a ton of tools that basically they can log into. We also provide separately at data.apptelligent.com a comprehensive readout of the mobile industry of both at a high level and then within certain geographic regions and specific app store categories, all the various types of data you would need throughout an application's lifecycle to be able to make business decisions. I mentioned some of them earlier, but an easy example is you're working on your app, you're in San Francisco, you have a lot of bandwidth on the network, you're using that latest Galaxy device or the latest iPhone, but you want to launch, say, the app in India. Those things look very different. Yeah. You need a different test strategy. You need to look at different types of functionality that you can support based on what the operating systems are in use. Mm-hmm. You need to look at service providers like CDN. So there's a whole long list of decisions you'd have to make, and we provide a lot of that data on that data site. Interesting. So every time an application gets updated and it says something about fixes, crashes, or crash fixes, it's all because of you guys, basically. Then we can blame you for that. You have the reason the company, actually that's a good segue to the reason the company got started is we used to be app developers ourselves, like founders, and we just found that there was very little visibility once you launched an app. It kind of felt like you're throwing it over the fence into the app store, right? And the app stores give you a little bit of data, but it's really not enough to make these types of decisions. Yeah. So we had built some tools for ourselves. We spoke to the community at large and just realized that this was a widespread problem. And that was we incorporated back in January 2011, decided, this should be the company. That's what led to it. Oh, very cool. Very interesting. Well, good. Well, I know one thing I want to touch you guys a bit about was that report you put out here recently, kind of looking at more carrier-specific performance. And that report seemed to look at kind of the latency that customers were seeing in terms of their app usage via various carriers. I don't know if you want to go into maybe a little bit of detail there and kind of what you guys, saw in those numbers. I mean, obviously it seems some operators perform better than other operators did, but I guess what was the basis of that report and kind of what you guys found out from that report? Sure. So the data we focused in on for that report was we looked at carriers across the globe. We looked at our aggregate data around latency, round trip time, around latency consistency. Mm-hmm. And we define that as percentage of requests above 500 milliseconds. So, it's one thing to look at the average. It's another to kind of look at the long tail of requests and, see if a carrier is consistently good or bad. And we also looked at error rates. So these are HTTP errors. And we looked at this across different geographic regions. And we're also taking a look at this across App Store categories. Now, what we did also was we also put together an index with a partner of ours, with a partner called STL Partners, this MobiNex index. where we took our data around latency, consistency, error rate, and then we also included download speed there. That one was from OpenSignal.
Mm-hmm.
And we combined all that and we stack ranked the carriers across the globe. And, there are some surprising results that came out of that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, I know we wrote up a story on it ourselves here, and it did seem to show that, I guess, T-Mobile, at least here domestically, had probably some of the least latency. Them and Verizon were kind of at the top there, and then some of the other operators a little bit farther behind there. But I guess, obviously latency is a big issue for consumers, because, again, that pushing a button, customers expect something to happen pretty rapidly. And when something doesn't happen, you get the double tapping, triple tapping, and then next thing you know, a customer's throwing their phone across the room or out a window or something like that. And that frustration level is always a big issue. So obviously the latency is a big measurement for carriers to take a look at.
Yeah, and it also follows the trends of applications, right? It's, if you look at apps are no longer this thing that just has large file downloads for you, right? It's many communications with various cloud service providers. There's a high volume of requests going out with typically a small response. And when that happens, you really care about latency. Download speed comes into play when, again, it's just like you want to download a file, a very large file, maybe, and also, when you're looking at things like streaming. But in general, latency has a very direct impact on that user experience for those app publishers who at times can feel somewhat disconnected from the carrier. And so, it presents an issue where, like the example I gave where, you're working on your app and then you have users complaining about network issues in a different region. Yeah,
definitely. I guess how relevant is the application experience connected to, I guess, the general overall carrier network experience? Because obviously, I think some of us think that the app, space is somewhat segregated from the traditional carrier network interactions. But I guess what's the connection there between the two?
Right. Well, it's so the platform owners, you want to call them, the carriers and the OEMs. They're actually typically blamed first when the application is not working. The average consumer looks at their phone and they see it says AT&T or Samsung on it, and guess who gets the support call, right? Or who initiates the return? Yeah. And so it's extremely important, and those applications are also the lens that consumers are viewing the network through. They eclipse web browsing now, the use of apps, by a large factor, and when consumers are making those decisions on which network to join, when they're talking with their friends about their carrier, they're really looking at it through, how is Facebook? Does Facebook run well? Or how are
the important stuff?
Clash of Clans running? Whatever the app that you're using.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess then, as a carrier looking at the results from this specific report here, what should they take out of that report? Obviously, you do have a bit of a ranking and you kind of show some actual numbers in there. But I guess as a carrier looking at that, what should be their main, takeaway from the numbers from that report?
Right. Well, there does seem to be some clustering by region. So clearly, the networks are, their first priority is to make sure they compete within their footprint, or within their market, I should say. So obviously, making sure that you measure well against your competition. In the case of the U.S., T-Mobile came out overall on top, which I have to say it's. And this has actually been validated by some other firms that we've seen. They've been doing great there, and I think it's partly because they've made some recent investments in their network. It's a younger, or I should say, a slightly just a newer network in general. And there doesn't seem to also be a correlation between price and performance there. When you look at the networks ranked, which for a carrier is concerning because they need to figure out how to compete and price against each other. But there's a disconnect between that and the value that consumers are getting. And clearly it's also being reflected in the ads. So I don't know if you've seen any of the recent ads on TV, but there's if you pay special attention, they're very carefully worded. You can see, some talk about coverage, and this report, by the way, does not mention coverage, which, and T-Mobile does not mention coverage in their ads either.
Yeah.
So they run although it runs fast where there's a signal, right? So, whereas you see someone like a Verizon or AT&T talk more about coverage.
Yeah, no, I think it's pretty much impossible to get away from the wireless advertising at this point in our lives. It seems to be everywhere, and you're right. It's either carefully worded or a lot of very small fine print at the bottom as well. So they're very creative with it, that's for sure. But I guess maybe as a consumer looking at the results, I mean, like you said, there is kind of that value correlation to all of this. I guess what's your consumer takeaway when looking at the results as well?
Well, I think as a consumer, I'd say, I think the average consumer is a little disconnected from, under being able to understand some of these latency metrics. I think latency and the corresponding error rates that you see in the report, there's a very direct connection between that and the experience they will have while using mobile applications. Mm-hmm. So, if that is something important to them, then they should pay attention to the results here. But I think that'll come out anyway in the type of conversation I was mentioning before, because that really is the lens that they use. Yeah. I think from the app publisher standpoint, that are the ones that are servicing the consumers with those apps, they actually have a different role, which is how do I mitigate these issues that the carriers may inflict upon my brand, willingly or unwillingly. For example, I know there was an issue with a certain carrier in the U.S. that was changing image file types as they were delivered to devices, right, and that was causing some problems. Certainly the use of network acceleration technologies, and I'm separating that from CDNs as a kind of a separate entity or separate service that you can provide. There are a bunch of service providers you can use to try to mitigate issues that will negatively impact the app and ultimately that end user. I think there's also design decisions that need to be made because of these carrier issues. Mm-hmm. I gave you the example of working on an app in the US and launching it in India. Well, if video streaming is involved, maybe you just deliver images, in that different region. Instagram is famous for their design of, you take a photo and you're choosing a filter, but really what's happening is they're uploading the image while you're picking that filter, right? So they're distracting you. So, what shiny bells and whistles can you show that consumer to make, the app seem faster?
That's okay.
Sorry about that. There's actually a Project Fi subscriber. And so what you're hearing is it's calling through my computer.
Oh yeah.
Because my phone wasn't. It rings both the computer and the phone at the same time.
Well, maybe on that topic, really quick, how do you like the service?
It's good. It's interesting. It's I used to be a Verizon subscriber, and certainly Verizon had better coverage. I could tell. What Fi does is switch between Sprint and T-Mobile, depending on where there's a signal. Yep. What I like the most is just it's very cheap. Very simple pricing plan to understand. There's a great companion app with it where you can track your data usage, and there's a global flat fee for data. So it's just something like $10 a gigabyte a month, no matter where you are. And I just find that not having to worry about when I travel using data, that's great.
Yeah, it's a good point. But anyway, back to the application developers. Obviously, like you said, if they've got more data intensive applications, obviously this report definitely touches a little bit more because again, if a customer is trying to do a lot of pictures or video or whatever it is to the app, latency part's going to be some of an issue as well then for them.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, it definitely depends on the type of application and what app store category you're in. There's definitely different expectations for each of those categories. Gaming, for example, there tends to be a little bit of a higher pain threshold. Consumers are just used to high crash rates, high latency. It's you're always kind of pushing the limits of the device in many of those titles anyway. Yeah. but then you get to other verticals like finance, where that thing better work.
Some high value customers involved there too.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. Very high, LTV, high acquisition costs. There's nothing more expensive than it's much cheaper to keep your current customers than acquire new ones, especially in that space.
Yeah, definitely. Well, very good. Well, like I said, it's really interesting to kind of see the report come out. Again, the rankings are interesting always. It's just kind of good to get an update on how the networks are performing because, like you said, we do get a lot of advertising about coverage and capacity and various things like that. And again, this kind of showed another angle of what's happening out there in the networks, at least for people.
Yeah, I think for the carriers, they just don't have this data available to them. The fact is the carriers view this as through the lens of, let me do some radio signal testing, let me look at a speed test app, right? But they don't have that collective view of, how are the consumers on my network? What is their experience like? Yeah. So it's a very unique thing, and we've been in talks with many of them to, help improve their networks. And so that's a conversation, when they make those investments. And the fact is, the report does show that it is directly correlated. There was some data we had in there that charted consumer scores, consumer satisfaction scores against the index, then the Mobinex index we created, and sure enough, it was correlated. Yeah,
it makes sense. And again, I always talk to operators, that's always a concern of theirs, is making sure that customers stay happy. Because like you said, it's easier to keep a customer, cheaper to keep a customer than it is to get a new one. So that's always important for this. But we'll get it. Hey, Andrew, again, thanks so much for the time on this today. Obviously, a very interesting report, and hopefully we'll talk again soon on some more reports coming out for you guys. Well, thanks for watching this week's show, and make sure to check us out again next week when we are scheduled to speak with Veson from Wireless 2020 to get an update on the ongoing FCC 600 megahertz incentive auction proceedings.